Welcome to another edition of Cheers to Careers. I'm Steve Ridinghouse, the Career Outreach Coordinator at the School of Journalism and Mass Communications at KU.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Cheers to Careers. I'm Steve Ridinghouse, the Career and Outreach Coordinator for the KU School of Journalism and Mass Communications. We're joined today by Adam Sechrist, Executive Vice President, Head of Earned Media for BCW Global, one of the largest PR firms in the country, based out of New York. Welcome, Adam.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Thanks for being here. I
Yeah,
know you're in
of
town
course.
for the KU game, and I always like to take advantage of anytime we have alumni popping in. It's like, hey, let's make this happen.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you were flexible. So what do you do in your role with BCW Global? I know you lead a team of 35.
Yeah, so I oversee earned media across all of our practices. So it's corporate, brand, healthcare, and technology. We got about a team of 35 folks, mix of former journalists who jumped into the PR space and folks who have been in PR since they left school, basically. And we work on strategic communications campaigns for some of the biggest brands and corporate companies, that's what they are, corporations out there across the US and globally.
You've got a very thorough LinkedIn profile. It was amazing to follow your track. Obviously, you love New York. I think I saw, 4 different times in New York? What keeps pulling you back?
It's like the jobs, the work.
Yeah.
Like I left KU in 2006, got a job at Good Morning America, moved straight out there, was basically a glorified assistant for a year. And then moved back to Kansas, moved to Wichita to actually save money and make a little money because you did not make money in New York. You spent every single dime and then some. But then eventually made it back to New York because job came calling at ABC again, and then left and went back because the job came calling with Katie Couric's team, and then left and then came back when the agency I'm at now recruited me back over there.
And I know when we talked earlier today, I mean, you have kind of that traditional media background, like you said, with the broadcasting. When did you decide to pivot more towards that PR, strategic communication industry?
Yeah, so, I spent 15 years on the broadcast journalism side. The last gig I had was at CBS News, running editorial and guest booking for the streaming platform. We were the first broadcast network to actually launch a streaming news 24/7. Now all of them have them, like ABC News Live, NBC News Now. CBS is still there, but I was on the team that launched that. And I did that for about 5 years. It was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to do that. Ran around the country in 2016 chasing Hillary and Trump all over the country. And then was facing, we're going to do this again in 2020. And then I was like, and it was a question of, I loved my career in journalism, but where would the career go? Mm-hmm. And a good friend of mine was like, you should come try this PR thing out. So I pulled the exit chute from news and jumped over to the PR side of the world and have just found a lot of success. And I think part of that is because of that deep journalism background that I had and bringing those skills over into the PR side of the world.
So it was a pretty smooth transition for the most part?
Yeah, I mean, it was hard. I still remember starting, we were remote because I literally got offered the job at my old agency the day New York City shut down for the pandemic. And we started work, I was remote, and I remember scribbling down on a piece of paper, and I still had the piece of paper, what the heck am I doing? I had no idea what I was doing. I was literally Googling things quickly. What does that phrase mean? What does that term mean? I don't know. What's the difference between a press release and a media advisory? I don't know. They're all the same to me. And I started, crash course in myself and that. You knew the basic skills to do it, but it was just a learning curve to figure out the lingo, how to work with clients, how to do all that. But the experience you have from journalism, when you're chasing people down all the time, trying to get them to tell you their stories, those are those people skills that translate over to how you deal with clients and work with clients.
And I would think with your focus on earned media, the background in journalism has got to help. Because when I think of earned media, I think of definitely that strong media relations component to it. I mean, I would think that was pretty smooth.
So it definitely helped. It is why a lot of the folks that when we look to go hire more people for the earned media team, it's that they have some journalism background. They don't have to, but it's helpful that they have that journalism background, because those skills that you get as a journalist, learning how to tell stories, short and concise stories, right? How to convince people of things. When you're a journalist, you're out there convincing people to tell you their story. And I say this often, there were many people I got to give me interviews that should never have talked to me ever, right? But they did, because it's those people skills to get that out of them and ask them those right questions. So you're taking those skills and transferring them over to a communication side where you're looking at complicated issues that a client has and how you leverage the media to help them meet their goals. So, yeah.
And I know earlier today when we were talking, I think you had an interview were like the executive, he had a little bit of concerns where your background was pretty much traditional journalism, but I think he had a couple of years already experience. And he wasn't for sure if he should be talking to you, but you must have convinced him.
Yeah, and I mean, but it was really explaining why and how a journalism background can make some people the best people to move into a media relations role. And it is because look, it helps. Relationships help, but I will never ask somebody in an interview, who do you know? Who do you know? Who can you pick up the phone and call? Because none of that matters unless you have a good story to tell.
Right.
And so, when we have clients say, well, who do you know at the Wall Street Journal that you could call? It's like, I'm not going to tell you who I know, but what's your story? What's the story we're trying to tell? Let's shape that, and then we can start pulling in those favors. We need to pull those in with some folks that we know.
And speaking of storytelling, I mean, do you have kind of a checklist, like, I need to know this before we pitch a story? I mean, what are you looking for to tell that good story?
The most important thing to me is who the audience is. Like, I want to figure out with you who the audience is you're trying to reach. Are you trying to reach investors? Are you trying to reach customers? Are you trying to actually use earned media to reach your own internal employees, right? And using external comms for an internal purpose. Well, who is that audience you're trying to reach? And then we're going to backtrack into that, because it's like, let's figure that out, then figure out the means of how we're going to reach them through what platforms we're going to use, and then what is the story, right? And are there different stories to tell for different audiences that are all going to get to that same goal at the end? It's a fun thing to figure out when you've got a client's issue or a story they're trying to tell, and you really get to get creative on how are we going to tell that story, so that when we go to the journalists that we're trying to work with on this, and we're using them as that conduit to the greater audience, right? How we get them to work with us and tell the story that we want to tell,
right?
Instead of an agenda that they may have, but the story too. Yeah, it's a fun puzzle to figure out every single time.
What about the challenges of, like, you talk about being persuasive in your writing, your speech? I bet there are times where you're communicating with kind of that C-suite level. I know sometimes they need a little extra push about what direction to go. I mean, is everybody different, or do you have kind of a go-to strategy for dealing with the C-suite?
Every executive we work with is different. You have some executives that definitely want to do media. You have some executives that don't want to do media at all. And part of our job as agency professionals and consultants for these companies and these executives is really showing them the pros and the cons, honestly, of like, we think if you have this conversation now, it's going to help X, or actually don't have this conversation, let's stay out of it because we need to let the dust settle on something, right? Or if we're making a big internal decision and an announcement's going to come out and that's going to go public, what are the ramifications of it? So these executives like to know, how it's going to impact their overall business. And when you can present that case to them and why doing a 4-minute fun segment on the Today Show is worth it versus a sit-down interview with a Wall Street Journal print reporter who's going to ask more questions, right? So it's weighing that, where is the safest place to go and the most effective place to go to reach those audiences that they want to reach. And when you explain that to them and you have executives that want you to explain that to them and they want to learn that, that's the best relationship you can have with an executive you're working with, because then they're a partner to you in that, and they get it, and they rely on our expertise to really drive their messaging forward and help them stay in their roles and keep their boards happy and everything else.
Yeah, well said. So when you work with your team of 35, that seems like a large team to me. How do you keep moving everybody in the right direction, or do you just kind of play to their strengths?
Well,
or how do you